cold wind from the Tyrrhenian Sea moved across the sand at Anzio, carrying the smell of burnt powder and crushed concrete. On the afternoon of January 30th, 1944, a German officer pressed his eye against the periscope of his command bunker, his hand trembling as he tried to understand what he had just seen. In the place where the map clearly marked Louisa, the strongest fortification on this sector, there was now only a smoking crater. 4 feet of reinforced concrete had vanished. 32 men had vanished, and the hill itself had shaken as if struck by an underground earthquake. No one had heard the shell coming. No warning, no whistle, no time to react. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, beyond sound and sight, an American gun had fired a single 240mm round that erased a bunker built to withstand everything Germany knew about modern fortification. In the months that followed, the same soundless destruction would appear at Monte Cassino, along the Apennine ridges, across the Gothic Line, and deep inside the Siegfried Line, defenses that Hitler believed would stop an army. But the German soldiers inside those fortifications were learning something different. They were not fighting inside strongholds anymore. They were sitting inside concrete coffins, waiting for a single American shell to find them. It was the moment the war changed. And this is the story of the weapon that rendered an entire doctrine obsolete. On the afternoon of January 30th, 1944, the horizon above Anzio trembled as if struck from beneath the earth. Shock waves rolled across the damp beach, through layers of barbed wire, and down into the command tunnels carved into the slopes of the Alban Hills. Inside a dimly lit German bunker, dust sifted from the ceiling, while officers stared silently at the defensive map pinned to the wall. But Headman Vera Hoffman was not looking at the map. His eye remained fixed on the periscope mounted in the steel dome overhead. Moments earlier, he had been watching Bunker Louisa, rated to withstand 210mm shells. Now, through the haze of dust and smoke, there was nothing left. No roof, no walls, no movement, only a crater, wide and smoking. For Hoffman, the most terrifying thing was not the loss of 32 men. It was the realization that no one had heard the shell coming. No warning, no sound, just disappearance. That evening, he wrote a single line in his diary. "The Americans possess artillery beyond imagination. Bunker Louisa no longer exists. Our engineering standards mean nothing." This was the first time German forces encountered the American M1 240mm Howitzer, the heaviest mobile field artillery piece the United States would deploy in the war. In 1940, before the United States had even entered the war, the Army Ordnance Department conducted a classified study on modern European fortifications. What they observed in Poland and France was alarming. German bunkers were no longer crude concrete boxes modeled after World War I. The new fortifications were internally reinforced with deep steel grids built into terrain contours, connected by hardened tunnels designed to survive prolonged bombardment. The conclusion of the 1940 report was blunt. No existing American artillery can reliably destroy modern German bunkers. The Army demanded a weapon that seemed impossible at the time: mobile, able to fire a 360-pound shell, capable of penetrating 3 to 6 feet of reinforced concrete, with accuracy sufficient to hit individual bunkers, and transportable by standard military equipment. It was an outrageous requirement for 1940. But engineers at Watervliet Arsenal believed they could build it. 2 years later, they produced the M1 240mm Howitzer, an artillery piece weighing nearly 30 tons, costing as much as 12 Sherman tanks, requiring 8 hours to emplace, and demanding a perfectly coordinated 14-man crew. But when it fired, it changed battles. In the summer of 1943, after Sicily, the Allies pushed into Italy. The Apennine Mountains turned the country into a fortress, and under Kesselring's command, every valley became a killing ground. When the Allies struck the Gustav Line, they found hardened concrete bunkers, interlocking machine gun nests, reverse slope positions hidden behind ridgelines, and deep tunnel networks. For 5 months, Allied attacks stalled at Monte Cassino. American 105s and 105s shook the hills, but did not break the fortifications. A report from the U.S. 34th Infantry Division read, "We shake the mountain, but not their bunkers." The Anzio landing was meant to bypass the Gustav Line, but the Germans quickly entrenched the surrounding hills, turning the beachhead into a trap. The Allies finally realized what the 1940 report had warned. Italy would become a bloodbath unless the United States fielded a weapon capable of cracking fortified lines. Thus, the 697th and 698th Field Artillery Battalions brought the first M1 240mm guns from Naples to Anzio, and before the Germans could react, they were already firing. At 14:30 on January 30th, 1944, Battery C of the 697th FA received coordinates from a forward observer positioned near the front. The target was a German observation bunker on the Alban Hills. Moments later, a 360-pound M17 concrete piercing round left the barrel. There was no audible whistle, no rising scream, just the sudden eruption on the distant hillside. The shell carried more than 2.8 million foot-pounds of kinetic energy and penetrated deep into the reinforced concrete before detonating. When the dust settled, Bunker Luisa had vanished. From that moment, the Italian campaign ceased to be a contest of infantry alone. It became a duel between American super-heavy artillery and German engineering doctrine. The day after the first strike, captured German prisoners all repeated the same message: "We will not go into the bunkers again." A passage in the 715th Infantry Division's war diary recorded, "Each 240mm round produces an earthquake effect. Morale collapsing. Bunkers no longer safe." The Germans were accustomed to Soviet massed artillery. They had never faced an artillery piece that could destroy a single bunker with surgical precision from over 20 kilometers away. The 240mm power did not come from weight alone. It came from the entire fire control system that supported it. 1. Fire Direction Center FDC. A trained team calculated firing solutions using graphical firing tables, mechanical slide rules, meteorological data, and updates from forward observers. Time from request to impact, 4 minutes. 2. Time on target. Multiple batteries fired at staggered times so all shells landed simultaneously, overwhelming bunkers before anyone inside could move. 3rd M17 concrete piercing shell. Hardened steel cap, delayed fuse, and enough mass to penetrate reinforced concrete before detonating. 4. M114 high explosive shell. 49 pounds of TNT mixed with aluminum powder, increasing blast effect by 40%, creating a crater as wide as 50 feet. The result, no bunker survived a direct hit. During Operation Diadem on May 11, 1944, 8 240mm Howitzers from the 244th Field Artillery Battalion could reach every fortified point beneath the monastery at Cassino. Fortifications previously untouched by bombs or conventional artillery began disappearing under precisely placed 240mm rounds. Major General Francis Tucker wrote, "A direct 240mm hit eliminates a bunker completely, without exception." By the end of the 72-hour bombardment, 43 major positions had been targeted, 39 destroyed outright, the remaining 4 abandoned after near misses. What months of bombing failed to achieve, the 240mm accomplished in 3 days. After D-Day, the hedgerow country of Normandy revealed a new challenge: German reverse-slope bunkers, protected by terrain, invisible from the front. But 240mm guns were dragged into the bocage with prime movers and cranes. Once in place, they could arc shells high over the ridges and into hidden positions. At Hill 122 near St. Lo, 3 240mm rounds collapsed a key bunkered observation post. German prisoners remarked, "We believed the reverse slope protected us. Then the ground disappeared beneath us." For the first time, elite German paratroopers, veterans of Monte Cassino, abandoned prepared defenses. Their commander admitted, "Your super-heavy artillery made static defense impossible." By late 1944, German headquarters issued a directive: fixed fortifications must be abandoned when American super-heavy artillery is present. Bunkers concentrate casualties. This was unprecedented in German military history. An entire defensive philosophy, refined for decades, had collapsed in months. Hitler himself reportedly asked after reading a report from Aachen, "Was ist das für eine Waffe?" What weapon is this? Its true power was not merely destructive force, but sustainability. 315 guns produced, over 118,000 rounds fired, more than 35,000 rounds consumed per month in early 1945. Reserves of 100,000 plus rounds maintained. 0 catastrophic gun failures. The Germans realized something worse than the weapon itself. America could produce more ammunition and fire more accurately than Germany could rebuild defenses. As the Allies prepared for the decisive advances from Normandy towards St. Lo, through the Siegfried Line, across the Rhine, and into the heart of Germany, the 240mm Howitzer stopped being a supporting tool. It became a spearhead, tasked with dismantling every fortress Germany had spent a decade constructing. In Part 2, we follow these earthquake shells through the turning points that broke the German defensive spine. The Scharnhorst Line, the Siegfried fortifications, Metz, the Ruhr, and finally the crossing of the Rhine. The destruction of Bunker Louisa was not an isolated event. It was the beginning of a new pattern, one that reshaped every battlefield where the 240mm appeared. In the days following the first strike at Anzio, American commanders noticed something strange in the German defensive network. Bunkers that should have been manned were silent. Observation posts were abandoned. Machine gun nests were left without crews, and entire strongpoints showed no signs of resistance. German units were not retreating as a coordinated force. They were disintegrating. General Lucian Truscott wrote in his diary, "The 240mm did not break their lines. It broke their will to occupy them." Before long, the Allies understood the psychological gap the weapon opened. A new tactic emerged: remove the bunkers first, and everything else falls apart. By February 1944, both American super-heavy artillery battalions were fully operational at the Anzio beachhead. Each gun required a prime mover, a 6-wheeled wagon for the barrel, a 14-man crew. the M2 craner and engineer support for recoil pits. The emplacement process averaged 8 hours. But once positioned, they became the spear point of a new kind of warfare. During the month-long siege around Anzio, 2,847 rounds of 240mm ammunition were fired, 67 reinforced positions were engaged, 61 were completely destroyed, and the remaining bunkers were abandoned by their crews. The accuracy shocked the Germans. Every impact crater, every collapsed position, every destroyed tunnel reinforced the same psychological message. You are not safe anywhere. Anzio was no longer a stalemate. It was an experiment, one that proved the limits of German fortifications. The Italian front in early 1944 was collapsing into a grinding, attritional nightmare. German engineers were masters of defensive construction, and the Italian terrain favored them. The Allies faced obstacles that conventional artillery could not solve: mountains that shielded reverse-slope bunkers, fortifications buried into rock layers, interlocking kill zones, positions designed to resist 155mm fire indefinitely. The 240mm answered all of these problems at once. It struck vertically, penetrating from angles conventional guns could not reach. It penetrated before exploding, shattering bunkers from inside. It allowed the infantry to move through zones that had stopped entire divisions. For the first time, the Allies could realistically dismantle German defensive belts without paying the price in thousands of infantry casualties. In May 1944, 8 240mm Howitzers from the 240th Field Artillery Battalion took positions near Mignano, within range of every fortified point beneath the Monte Cassino monastery. This was the strongest segment of the Gustav Line, held for months, reinforced repeatedly, supplied through hidden mountain paths. On the night of May 11th, forward observers identified key bunkers. Firing tables were prepared, weather conditions logged, and TOT schedules coordinated. When the barrage began, it was not a carpet bombardment. It was surgical destruction. A single 240mm hit eliminated hardened bunkers that had resisted thousands of smaller shells. Within 72 hours, 1,847 rounds were fired. 39 of 43 major bunkers were destroyed. The remaining 4 were deserted after near misses. Major General Francis Tucker wrote, "Our men had feared these bunkers for months. In 3 days, the Americans made them disappear. The Gustav Line, Germany's proudest defensive barrier, began to crack." After the landings of June 6th, the Allies faced a new form of German defense: the hedgerow fortress system. Every field, every crossroads, every ridge was fortified. German units used reverse slopes extensively, hiding entire bunker networks behind terrain folds that protected them from air attack. But the 240mm shattered this advantage. Technical Sergeant Raymond Jones watched the event unfold. A German reverse slope bunker, completely invisible to American troops, had been blocking movement towards St. Lo for days. A forward observer radioed the coordinates. 3 240mm rounds were fired. When the dust lifted, the hill had changed shape. There was no bunker, only a cavity. German soldiers who survived described, "The ground disappeared." There was no warning. It was like the earth opened and swallowed them. This was the turning point in Normandy. For the first time, German troops abandoned fortifications willingly, sometimes fleeing before the shells even hit. Static defense was dying, one bunker at a time. Germany believed the Apennine ridges were impervious to artillery. Bunkers were built into steep slopes, protected by layers of rock, with firing ports angled downward toward the valleys. Conventional bombardment failed. Airstrikes failed. Mortars failed. But the 240mm had something unique. High-angle fire. At the Fuda Pass in September 1944, 697th FA positioned their guns in the valleys. Shells arced nearly vertically. Detonations crushed bunkers from above. Shock waves traveled into tunnels and chambers, and entire mountain faces shook. Private Donald Matthews wrote home, "They go so high that they vanish into the clouds. Then they come straight down and the whole mountain jumps. The pass fell in 5 days. German diaries recorded, more die from collapsed positions than from combat." The Gothic line, meant to delay the Allies for months, had been pierced. Hundreds of miles long, comprising more than 18,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and dragon's teeth, the Siegfried Line represented the final shield of Germany. But when the 240mm arrived in September 1944, the line began to crumble. On October 8th, the 265th FA fired 238 rounds in 6 hours. 19 of 22 bunkers were destroyed. Infantry observers reported earthquake effects. German resistance evaporated. Corporal Robert Williams observed, concrete bunkers that were supposed to take days disappeared in minutes. German troops refused to enter pillboxes. Command posts were abandoned. Communications officers fled underground tunnels. A captured document from the 7th Army stated, "The enemy's super heavy artillery renders our fortified positions untenable." Morale effect catastrophic. The turning point was complete. The Siegfried Line had been built to stop armies. Instead, it had become a graveyard of German engineering ambition. The 240mm did not win the war alone, but it changed the shape of the war. It shifted battles from fight the defenders in their bunkers to remove the bunkers first. And once the bunkers disappeared, so did the German ability to control ground. The turning point was not just tactical, it was psychological. German soldiers no longer believed concrete could save them. Allied soldiers no longer feared attacking fortified positions. Commanders no longer hesitated when facing defensive belts. The front line itself changed character, from a wall to a corridor. This was the moment the Allies transitioned from breaking through German defenses to tearing them apart. And the 240mm was at the center of that transformation. By late 1944, German soldiers along the Western Front were fighting a war very different from the one they had been trained for. They no longer feared infantry assaults or tank breakthroughs. What they feared was silence. Silence meant that a forward observer somewhere, hidden in smoke, debris, or the folds of the train, was watching them. Silence meant the Fire Direction Center was calculating a firing solution. Silence meant that shells were already in the air, invisible, soundless until the final second. To the men in the bunkers, silence was the final warning. But by then it was already too late. Forward observers were the most exposed soldiers in the entire artillery system. They positioned themselves ahead of infantry lines, on ridge lines under sniper fire, inside ruined farmhouses, or within earshot of German machine gun nests. Their job was not to survive. Their job was to see. Lieutenant Robert Anderson spent 187 days directing fire for the 265th Field Artillery Battalion. In that time, he called in missions that destroyed 47 German bunkers. He lived with a constant understanding that his work killed dozens of men at a time. He wrote years later, "Calling in the 240mm felt like summoning a god of thunder, but you also saw the cost through your own lens. FOS carried heavy equipment, the SCR-610 radio pack, weighing nearly 50 pounds, the BC scope with 20 times magnification, plotting boards and aerial photographs, a compass and rangefinder. And they carried a psychological burden few could understand. From their observation points, they saw German soldiers running for cover, the wounded crawling from collapsed entrances, and bodies thrown by shock waves. Many slept poorly for the rest of their lives. The gun crews themselves lived a different kind of hell. Each round weighed 360 pounds, and during heated operations, they lifted and guided these shells dozens of times a day. They worked in mud, rain, freezing air, or unbearable heat. After every firing cycle, the ground trembled, dust fell from truck frames, chest cavities shook, and ears rang despite protection. Private Michael Sullivan of the 697 described the feeling. After 10 rounds, your body is gone. After 20, you are running on instinct. A 14-man crew had no room for mistakes. 2 operators ran the M2 crane. 4 men guided the shell into the breach. 2 loaded powder charges, 1 operated the breach. 1 laid the gun, and the rest managed vehicles, security, and ammunition flow. Every movement was rehearsed and every error could cost lives. When a premature detonation killed 5 crewmen near Pirmasens in March 1945, battalion officers rewrote procedures immediately. But crews returned to their guns the same day. German bunker design relied on the idea that reinforced concrete and steel could shield men from destruction. That assumption had held true since World War I. Even the heaviest 210mm artillery could damage a bunker, but rarely kill everyone inside. The 240mm rewrote that rule. When a concrete-piercing shell struck, the steel cap punched through outer layers, the delayed fuse detonated inside the structure. Shock waves bounced between reinforcement bars. Pressure spikes exceeded the tolerance of human organs, and roofs collapsed inward like folded paper. Those not killed by the blast were often buried alive. Veterans later described choking dust, total darkness, crushed limbs, and the ringing silence that followed the collapse, broken only by the muffled sound of comrades trying to dig upward. In interviews from the 1950s, survivors reported fear of basements, fear of parking garages, fear of reinforced ceilings, chronic nightmares of suffocating beneath concrete. Dr. Hans Müller labeled the condition bunker syndrome, a collection of trauma responses seen nowhere else in the war. The 240mm did not fire often. It didn't need to. Each impact created shock waves that traveled deep through the soil. German units stationed hundreds of meters away felt the tremor through their boots. It was unlike any other artillery effect. Not an explosion, but an impact, as if the ground itself had been struck by something enormous. This sensation spread panic faster than casualties. German commanders noted, runners abandoned their messages, machine gun crews left positions before firing, radio operators fled underground pipes, and infantrymen hid in woodland instead of entering bunkers. Reports from the Siegfried Line in late 1944 described entire platoons refusing to occupy hardened positions after a single 240mm strike landed nearby. A captured officer wrote, "Men will not enter stone or concrete when the Americans fire their heavy guns. They believe the structures will become tombs." Unit cohesion, usually a strength of German forces, collapsed under the fear of being entombed. In the Vosges and Hürtgen regions, German commanders believed dense forests would protect their bunkers. Trees concealed concrete. Fog hid positions. Observation became nearly impossible. But the 240mm did not require perfect coordinates. It only required probable ones. Battalions adopted new firing techniques, box and one fire, 4 shells at the corners of a suspected target zone, 1 in the middle, air burst with proximity fuses when available, shells exploding above the tree line, sending shock waves downward, ground shock targeting, deliberately striking rock ridges to collapse nearby structures. Master Sergeant Harold Anderson explained, "We didn't need a direct hit. A near miss did the job through the ground itself." Infantry following the shelling often found collapsed timber bunkers, broken steel beams, bodies crushed rather than wounded. The forest no longer offered cover. It became a trap. As the Allies advanced into German cities, Metz, Saarbrücken, Essen, Cologne, German engineers converted factories into hardened fortresses. Steel-reinforced floors, towering concrete walls, blast-proof windows, underground tunnels fitted with firing ports. These were not simple buildings. They were industrial bunkers. Yet in city after city, a small number of 240mm guns were able to collapse entire walls, punch through factory facades, detonate inside machine halls, and rupture steel frames. Staff Sergeant James Peterson, a forward observer near Essen, described a strike on the Krupp steelworks. The 240 didn't just hit the building, it reached inside and tore it apart. German defenders emerging from the ruins were often stunned, psychologically broken, or unwilling to continue the fight. The destruction inflicted by the 240mm came at a price. For German soldiers, it was immediate and physical. For American soldiers, it was slower and quieter. Gun crews suffered chronic hearing damage, chest trauma from repeated concussions, joint injuries from shell handling, and long-term neurological symptoms. Forward observers carried guilt, stress injuries, and recurring nightmares about missions that ended entire units. The weapon forced both sides to confront the brutality of industrialized warfare. It was not a duel of men, but of materials, physics, and calculations. By the winter of 1944-45, the presence of a 240mm battalion altered the entire shape of German defenses. Where German units once fought with precision and coordination, they now fought with fear. Where bunkers once symbolized protection, they now symbolize death. Where commanders once trusted their fortifications, they now feared them. The 240mm did more than destroy positions. It created a constant, invisible terror, a battlefield where every bunker was a coffin, every tunnel a trap, and every second of silence a warning. This was the hell within, the internal collapse of an army that had believed concrete could save them. By the spring of 1945, the snow along the Rhine was melting, revealing fields torn open by months of bombardment. German fortifications no longer meant anything. The strongest bunkers had failed. Reinforced walls had failed. Even the belief in concrete had failed. After 18 months on the battlefield, the American 240mm had done something no other ground-based weapon of the war achieved. It made an entire defensive philosophy obsolete. German soldiers no longer defended the way they had been trained. Instead, they hid in houses, dug shallow personal pits, moved only at night, and abandoned bunkers even before they were targeted. When the 240mm battalions reached the Rhineland, they brought more than artillery. They brought a reputation. Among German infantry, 2 simple words spread: Der Tod, the death. Operation Plunder, the largest river crossing on the Western Front, began not with tanks or infantry, but with the familiar, soundless devastation of the 240mm. At 1700 hours, 12 240mm howitzers from the U.S. 12th Corps began methodically dismantling German bunkers on the East Bank. The process was simple. Destroy the observation posts first, then the bunkers covering the crossing zones, then any surviving strongpoints. Each target received 4 to 6 rounds. 7 hours later, 31 fortifications had been reduced to rubble, and 12 more were abandoned. German prisoners reported, "We chose to stay outside. The bunkers were more dangerous than the shells." American infantry noticed something unprecedented: no counter-battery fire. German resistance along the Rhine evaporated. Within the first night, the 84th Infantry Division lost 2,400 men, almost all to bunker collapses, not combat. A German officer wrote, "We no longer have engineers to rebuild bunkers, and even if we did, the men refused to enter them." The war was no longer a struggle, it was a collapse. The Ruhr was the heart of German manufacturing: steelworks, foundries, ammunition plants, machine factories. As the Allies closed in, these facilities were converted into improvised fortresses. Thick concrete walls, steel-reinforced floors, and factory halls repurposed as defensive citadels. But the 240mm treated them no differently than bunkers. On April 9, 1945, the 698th Field Artillery Battalion opened fire on the Krupp Works at Essen. A 3-story steel and concrete building, designed to withstand industrial shock, collapsed after 2 direct hits. American observers described, "It folded as if it were cardboard." By evening, factory structures had collapsed, defensive posts withdrew, resistance ended. Within 18 days, all 430,000 troops of Army Group B surrendered. Historians later suggested the psychological effect of the 240mm accelerated the collapse dramatically. Nuremberg, fortified over hundreds of years, was expected to resist fiercely. Medieval walls supported by modern bunkers gave the city a defensive structure unlike any other. On April 18, 1945, 3 battalions of 240mm guns surrounded the city. In 4 hours, 8 major bunkers were destroyed. Gates in the old city wall were blasted open. Machine gun nests vanished. Infantry entered streets that were already surrendering. An after-action report noted, "Every bunker destroyed opened several more streets to surrender." The symbolic heart of German nationalism was falling, brick by brick. Hitler had declared Aschaffenburg a fortress to be defended to the last man. But when the 265th FA brought 240mm guns to bear, rooftop fire points, concrete positions, interlocking MG nests, and hardened command posts, all vanished one by one. Forward observers placed 240mm rounds through specific windows of strongpoints, an unimaginable level of precision for a gun of this size. On the 3rd day, the German commander surrendered. His explanation was simple: the city would cease to exist before my officers did. Germany's concept of urban last stands ended that day. From March to May 1945, German infantry did not obey their doctrine. They obeyed fear. At the first hint of incoming heavy artillery, they fled bunkers, refused to man fortified lines, hid in woods instead of casemates, lay flat in fields rather than retreat underground. A directive from the German 7th Army on April 9, 1945 stated, "Do not occupy bunkers under super heavy artillery threat. Bunkers increase casualties." The truth was undeniable. Germany had lost the war of fortifications long before it lost the war of maneuver. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. The 240mm was not the only reason, but it was one reason the cost of victory was far lower than what the Allies had initially feared. It gave the U.S. Army something no other weapon had ever provided: the ability to erase any defensive position without sacrificing infantry. Eisenhower later wrote, "The 240mm gave us the power to break any strong point quickly and economically." The gun did not simply win battles, it saved lives. Dr. Hans Müller treated survivors of bunker collapses in Munich during the 1950s. He recorded fear of enclosed spaces, panic at loud noises, recurring nightmares of suffocation, refusal to enter basements. He named the condition bunker syndrome. For many German veterans, the war never ended. It followed them into every stairwell, every underground room, every vibration in modern life. Gun crewmen returned home with severe hearing loss, chest injuries from concussions, chronic joint pain, and haunting memories of what their shells had done. Forward observers carried the heaviest burden. They had watched destruction up close, too close. One wrote, "I know it saved American lives, but I still see the bunkers collapsing. Crater fields left by the 240mm still scar the countryside in Italy and Germany. Engineers call them the scars of industrialized war." The 240mm was slow, heavy, and mechanically demanding. Yet it embodied something larger than its size: the triumph of industrial capability over fixed fortification. Germany built thicker walls. America built shells that penetrated them. Germany expanded its defensive lines. America produced enough ammunition to erase them faster than they could be rebuilt. Inside the ruins of the Siegfried Line lay more than broken concrete. There lay the final proof that mass production could overwhelm engineering, precision could defeat static defense, and industrial democracy could outlast a totalitarian fortress state. Field Marshal Kesselring admitted, "The American 240mm was a weapon against which we had no answer." And a surviving German officer from Aachen said, "We were defeated not in our bunkers, but in our belief that bunkers could save us." The 240mm did more than break walls. It broke the idea that any wall could last. When the last shot echoed and the war ended, the message was clear. In an industrial age, no fortress is impregnable. No wall is immortal. No bunker is a refuge. The M1 240mm Howitzer had spoken, and its voice reshaped the future of warfare.